All yours.
Okay, so basically what we've got now is the court filings, and these are actually first provided to the Financial Times. But what we have seen in those is that several days prior to the collapse of FTX, one of the most senior people at FTX was already tipping off authorities in the Bahamas about possible misuse of funds. So this executive is someone called Ryan Salame, and essentially he was the former co-CEO at FTX Digital Markets. And basically he told regulators in the Bahamas on November 11, so 2 days before the insolvency proceedings actually started, that client assets were being transferred to Alameda to cover financial losses there. And so on top of that, Salame also alleged that only 3 people had the authority to authorize such a transaction, and that was Sam Bankman-Fried, the former head of engineering or executive Nishad Singh, and the FTX co-founder Gary Wang.
Okay. That's a lot to unpack, really, of just how far they went to try to mask some of these account details in some ways.
Yeah, and we're starting to get a lot more details coming through on that as well, the sort of ways that they were circumnavigating official protocols here. So essentially Bloomberg's seen some internal documentation from FTX, and that focuses on GitHub, which is essentially a sort of repository where companies and software developers can use and store and share code. And so what we've seen from this documentation is that this GitHub account, which had the name of Nishad Singh, so the former executive or engineering director, and it seems that he authored code to hide Alameda's ballooning liabilities. So this account had annotated code snippets, and these included certain phrases like career KYC, BYD expenses count, and that documentation, which was reviewed by Bloomberg, was later tied to a career expenses account. And this was also something picked up by the CFTC in their lawsuit, and they're basically saying that that so-called Korean account enjoyed the same privileges of Alameda's main account and sub-accounts, but was also exempted from parts of FTX's risk management practices.
And you know, all these things do paint a fairly bad picture of the industry, right? So I'm wondering how that narrative sort of went into the discussions in the U.S. Senate, for example. Was this bad behavior by someone, or was this the industry?
Yeah, that's really the ongoing debate, especially with lawmakers, because, yeah, we did have that hearing in the Senate on Wednesday, and there's really 2 different takes on this. So, for instance, we heard from the Senate Banking Committee chair, that's Sherrod Brown, and he basically said that if we're going to learn from FTX's meltdown, then you really need to take a look at all of the conflicts of interest that can happen at these centralized exchanges that are carrying out multiple business functions. And so he says that maybe we need to think about giving more disclosures to customers, investors. They really understand how a token or a crypto platform is operating. So that could maybe looking at existing regulations around banks or securities laws, for instance. But then on the flip side to that, you have others in the industry, including the top Republican, for instance, Pat Toomey, on the banking committee, and he basically says don't treat FTX as being something that's emblematic of the entire industry, that is just a lone bad actor, and actually there's a lot of promise in this sector.
Well, Empire Manufacturing is a big disappointment for those who were hoping for a rebound, down to negative 11.2 from 4.5. Retail sales just coming in now for November, down by 0.6%. October revised up to a 1.3% gain, so a little bit better there. Retail sales ex autos down negative 0.2%, and ex autos and gas down negative 0.2%. The retail sales control group, just to round out the trilogy here, down negative 0.2%. However, that was revised lower for October to a positive 0.5% from a positive 0.7%. So retail sales coming in weak here. Just a couple more numbers here today. Initial jobless claims come in at 211,000, a major drop from the 230 the week before. Continuing claims are at 1,671,000. That's the same as the prior week. Now, remember, those are delayed a week from the initial claims. We're still waiting for the Philly Fed numbers to come out, but while we're waiting for that, we'll take a look at what's going on in retail sales as John gives you the markets.
Session lows, Mike. Equities down by 1.2% on the S&P. Bizarre that we're having this conversation about recession, and you might say, well, look at retail sales, and I would say, look at jobless claims. 211,000, Tom, and we're having this conversation about recession in America with jobless claims at 211.
And they're countable data, and they're weekly, and they're often, and they're going to have to look at that. I also know continuing claims pretty much flat with where we were last time. What I would suggest, John, is we go back to the heart of this, and Mike can pick up on this if we want to stay on this or go to ECB where there's some real market action. But the bottom line is the new study of choice is service sector X this and X that. I'll let you decide.
X whatever you like.
We're Xing out.
That's how the story.
But there's a new. You have to have. If McKee's involved, you have to have a new measure involved.
Yields just a little bit higher at the front end still on a 2-year to 423. Looking at the 10-year, basically unchanged at 448. So you've got a little bit more curve inversion here. We're negative, I think, Lisa, let's call it negative 75.
This is incredibly confusing data. I'm looking at this right now, and to your point, you can paint one story if you look at retail sales. You can point to another if you look at the jobless claims. The big question is just how sticky this is. And Mike, before we get back to the ECB and that really market-moving statement, I'm curious from your perspective, is there a trend here in retail sales that suggests that consumers are flat on their backs and they're pushing back and they're not buying as much because of their negative real wages?
Well, in general, it looks like goods were suffered during this. Now, the retail sales numbers only include one services industry, and that's food services and drinking places, and that was up almost 1%. So people were spending on services. Now, the interesting thing about retail sales is it's always heavily revised because it really only covers the first part of the month. So either we moved some holiday sales into October, or people are delaying getting on with it and getting their stuff because we see department stores and clothing stores down 0.2%, department stores down 3%. So I don't know where people are going to get their Christmas presents from, but even non-store retailers, which would include your Amazons
Some of
and
us don't
Walmarts,
start our Christmas
down
presents.
9/10.
Thanks for watching. I hope you got a lot from it.